The crisis of the 3rd century was a significant test for the Roman Empire. 50 years of incessant civil war, aggravated by the heaviest military conflicts with neighbors on the eastern and Germanic borders, convincingly showed that the empire needed to reform, and urgently. The crises of economy, army, and politics developed in parallel and mutually reinforced each other. The empire could exist quite calmly on the many crutches with which it was propped up by Octavian Augustus, but only in conditions of external stability. And there was none. In the east, from the amorphous and torn from within Parthia emerged a powerful, strong, and very ambitious Sassanid Iran, able to confront Rome on equal terms. On the Danube and Rhine, more and more often Rome faced a numerically superior enemy, requiring the tension of significant forces. The changed strategic situation required a multiple increase in defense spending. If earlier Rome, with all imperfection of communications, transfer of a legion from the Rhine to Mesopotamia could take up to a year, could maneuver reserves and transfer troops to threatened directions without fear of a blow to the weakened, now weakening the border even for a moment caused an imminent attack. To strengthen the army, you need money. To raise money, you need to strengthen the vertical of power. To strengthen the vertical of power, you need to reassemble the entire system of government. The empire was too huge, too clumsy. It had huge resources, but it wasted them inefficiently. Now it was coming to an end. The reforms of Diocletian and Constantine will determine the shape of the empire for the next centuries, creating a model of state apparatus which will be reproduced by all sufficiently developed states in the future. And the first and most important thing that the reformer did was the complete equalization of all regions with each other. Those preferences that were once enjoyed by Italy, many colonies and municipalities, in the form of tax exemptions, were canceled. For the entire empire, for the first time, was introduced a unified grid of taxes, the basis of which was a per capita tax. The value of the tax was calculated according to census lists, but the scale was flat. Also, indirect taxes did not go anywhere. Tax on the turnover of merchants and artisans, tax on the bequest of property, duties, road tolls. But all these types of taxes were systematized and brought into a single, consistent system throughout the empire. To improve control and fiscal control, the old provinces were fragmented and their number now exceeded 100. At the same time, each province, as before, had a governor with his own staff of officials. However, there were a couple of nuances. Firstly, now all governors and their subordinates were part of the state apparatus. Their positions had a class and a clear hierarchy. And in this hierarchy, viceroys of provinces were not the highest positions, so now a multi-level system was built over them. The whole empire was divided into 12 dioceses headed by vicars, and the dioceses were subordinate to the prefect of Praetoria. Each of these officials had their own staff dedicated to overseeing the lower levels of government. The prefect of the Praetorium was personally responsible to the emperor and was his right-hand man with extensive judicial and administrative functions. Secondly, as part of the civil branch of government, viceroys, vicars, and Praetorian prefects were deprived of military functions. This was done to prevent revolts of the viceroys, so frequent in the 3rd century. Now the army and the state apparatus existed as if in parallel, crossing only at the time of issuing money for soldiers' salaries. It was the Praetorian prefect, note that he no longer had anything to do with the Praetorian Guard, who was responsible for allocating funds to the army, so he was the only one who had influence on the army out of the entire civil apparatus. In fact, the Praetorian prefect was the head of the entire executive civil power of the empire. But he was not autocratic, for above the military and civil power now stood the apparatus of the imperial court. It consisted of hundreds of officials who controlled the civil and military authorities, as well as engaged in legislative support of their functioning. Court officials were present at all levels of the state apparatus, supervising and reporting up the hierarchy all the way to the emperor. But that was not all. The emperor also had secret agents, agentes in rebus, agents in cloaks, up his sleeve, who performed the functions of the FBI. A clear and rigid centralized system that kept an iron grip on the empire. I should note that the rebellions of viceroys, the separation of civil and military administration, did not prevent completely, but made it much more complicated. And it is all the more surprising that the empire was based on the same good old municipalities. They practically did not undergo any changes. They were still Rome in miniature, with magistrates, senate, and people's meetings. The Roman Republic in all its splendor continued to exist at the level for which it was effective: local self-government. The imperial bureaucracy interfered little in the internal affairs of the municipalities, confining itself to tax collection and higher judicial functions in exchange for security. Thus, the most numerous part of the administrative apparatus of the empire formally, it was not, but at the same time, the magistrates of the municipalities could quite easily become part of the imperial officialdom. The whole empire was governed by only 6,000 officials of different levels. Officials were appointed by the emperor for a limited period of time, usually for a year, and only at the highest positions up to 5 years. It was done so that the officials did not grow to the post. On average, a career in the administration rarely exceeded 10, 15 years, after which the official retired, usually not a poor man. It would seem that everything is fine in the described scheme. But no. The imperial bureaucracy was a new and rather meritocratic social elevator where not only horsemen and senators, but also people from the plebs could get in. Nevertheless, the role in the bureaucracy of rich landowners who concentrated in their hands up to 80% of all free land in the empire was incredibly high. They were present at all levels of the bureaucracy and had sometimes overwhelming influence on the management of municipalities. Moreover, landowners achieved administrative and judicial immunity for their holdings. This is my private property, I can do what I want. This decision was a forced consequence of the crisis of the 3rd century, when landowners were almost the only force that tightly held power over their lands. Thus, within the municipal districts, there appeared lands formerly not belonging to them, but occupying a significant part of the territory. As long as the power of the center was strong, this state of affairs had no influence, but as soon as the empire weakened, due to military defeats or internal turmoil, it was no longer the empire that would dictate the terms of cooperation to such landlords, but they themselves. This is how feudalism was born. Thus, the empire, despite the already quite obvious monarchical nature of power and strong centralization, was still a state of many compromises. The emperor balanced between the army, the bureaucracy, the municipal aristocracy, and the landlords. Imperfect means of communication made it impossible to respond quickly to crisis situations, and even the abundance of well-defined laws and rules, with an abundance of officials controlling their execution, did not improve the situation much. Still, people are people, vicious and selfish. Nevertheless, the reforms of Diocletian and Constantine allowed to strengthen the empire so that it lasted much longer than could be expected in the conditions of the storm that had rolled up on it. The sun of Rome was setting, but night would not come for a long time, and the empire would last 150 years before it began to crumble.